Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today we're back at it with another spoiler video, this time for Magic the Gathering's Avatar: The Last Airbender expansion. If you're anything like me, you probably feel like product fatigue is just kicking you in the teeth with an endless spoiler season that just keeps coming. I can't even keep track of all the crazy sets that are coming out, but I am doing my best, and even though product fatigue is kicking me in the teeth, I am pretty excited about a lot of the gameplay implications that some of these cards are bringing to Magic, and I'm really excited to talk about these cards with you guys. So we're going to dive right in. Before we do, please hit that like button. It does really help the video get out to so many more people, it helps the channel grow, and it means so much to me, so thank you to those that do it. Also be sure to subscribe if you're new. More spoiler content is on the way, more crazy deck techs, so much stuff is happening on the channel, so I hope you're there for it. And also catch me live Monday through Friday over on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/quarantinecapricorn, because if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I'm there and I'm streaming. Now let's dive into these cards. We're going to start here by just taking a very quick look at the basic land arts that are coming. This is the plains, this is the island, this is the swamp, this is the mountain, and this is the forest. It's pretty obvious that it's representative of the Last Airbender universe. They look pretty cool, nothing super special, but kind of what I would expect from the set. First up, we've got Avatar Enthusiasts, a 2/2 human peasant ally for 1 white and 2. Whenever another ally you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So it does seem like they're bringing back like ally tribal as like a real thing in this set. We've had allies in the past. I believe we had what? Allies, rebels, mercenaries. There have been some interesting creature types that they've tried to make work in the past in Magic, and they're definitely bringing allies back to the table here, so that's pretty interesting. I'm not as much interested in this card, but I am pretty interested in seeing where they go with allies in general in the set, because I think that's an interesting flavor to kind of try to bring back. Next up, we've got Earth-Bending Lesson, a sorcery lesson for 1 green and 3, and you Earth Bend 4. Which means target land you control becomes a 0/0 creature with haste that's still a land. You put 4 +1/+1 counters on it, and when it dies or is exiled, you return it to the battlefield tapped. I think this ability is really powerful. The fact that you turn a land into a creature that actually comes back as just the land when it dies, to me is just very powerful. The fact that it's not going to actually go away. It's almost like giving your land indestructible in a way, but also getting board presence on the board, getting a 4/4. Now, granted, it is a little bit expensive at 4 mana to just get a 4/4, and it's not like you're ramping, it's not like you're creating a new land or anything like that, but at the end of the day, this is just a common, so it kind of makes sense. And another thing I want to point out about this, they confirmed that lessons are back, but learn is not coming back, which is really interesting. Learn and lesson as spell subtypes started in the Strixhaven expansion, and if you remember back then, you could cast cards that have a learn ability, and when you do, it would do something that isn't quite worth the mana that you're paying for the card, but part of the learn spell's ability would be that you fetch a lesson from your sideboard and put it into your hand. So it's kind of like you get 2-for-1 value. You increase your card advantage, you get to sort of tutor up any lesson that's in your sideboard and put it into your hand. So having lessons come back here without learn coming back feels a little bit weird, because if the lessons are supposed to power level wise be a little bit toned down, assuming that you can grab them with learn spells, I don't know how good they're actually going to be just playing in your deck, whether that's your 60 card constructed deck or your 40 card limited deck, and it kind of feels weird. The fact that these new cards are going to be standard legal, but they're also going to be legal in every format, so you have older formats that still have learn cards that can actually put these lessons in their sideboards and still fetch them with their learn cards. So on the one hand, maybe these will be underpowered in standard and potentially in limited because you have to include them in your actual deck, but they have to be balanced to be weak enough that they're not broken with learn cards in other formats. The other side of the equation is maybe these cards are just good enough to play in your deck, but the problem with that means that they're super busted with learn, which wouldn't be an issue necessarily for older formats because there's way more busted things happening in older formats than, you know, lessons being a little bit amped up in power. But my speculation is that maybe they plan to introduce learn spells later on down the line, and all of the lessons that are introduced in this avatar set just all of a sudden get a lot better as soon as you have access to learn spells in standard. Now, we don't know for sure that that's going to happen. That is just my speculation, but it does feel really weird getting lesson spells without getting learn spells, and it also feels like it's not just it's not just a coincidence that we do seem to be getting a return to Strixhaven at some point in the next couple years. I believe they've teased that a couple times. So I would guess going back to Strixhaven, we're going to get more learn cards, and these lesson cards are going to be a lot better once we have learn cards. So the question is, after we've seen all the lessons, do they end up being good enough to just include in your deck? If they are they busted if we eventually use them with learn spells? Or do they end up being really not that great in order to make sure they're not busted when we eventually get learn spells? And I know I went down a rabbit hole there, but I wanted to get all of my thoughts out of the way. I think it's really interesting that they're bringing lessons back without learn. One other thing I want to note before we move on to the next card is, even though they're not bringing in learn cards, they are bringing in a lot of cards that interact with lessons. There are cards that get better with lessons or get you some sort of extra value with lessons. They still have cards that interact with lessons and care about lessons in the set. It's just not a learn card that can fetch it from the sideboard. But next up, we've got Aang's Journey, another lesson. This one is just 2 colorless, and it has a kicker of 2 colorless. Search your library for a basic land card. If this spell was kicked, instead search your library for a basic land card and a shrine card. Reveal those cards, put them into your hand, shuffle, gain 2 life. Very interesting card. No matter what, even if you don't kick it, you get a land and 2 life. It reminds me of one of the lessons that we actually had in the initial Strixhaven set, but it has this built-in ability as well to just kick it and get even more value out of it, fetch a shrine, and shrines are coming to this game, which I find kind of interesting. The question is, how many are coming in Avatar? We don't really know that yet. Next up, we've got our first uncommon. This is Fire Nation Attacks, an instant for 1 red and 4. It has flashback for 1 red and 8, and you make 2 2/2 red soldier creature tokens with Fire Bending 1. The way Fire Bending works is whenever a creature with Fire Bending attacks, whatever the number they have after the keyword Fire Bending, that's how much red mana you create, but that mana is created on attack and only lasts until the end of combat, at which point it will go away. So it's mana that you have to use at instant speed, either with instants from your hand or with activated abilities, and it does seem like this set is going to include a lot of interesting activated abilities that you can use this mana for, so that it never really feels quite wasted. It'll be interesting to see just how deep they go with that, but this card could end up being really good, especially if you can give these 2/2s haste. Swinging with 2 dudes and getting 2 red mana back right away will kind of make this feel like it only costs 3 instead of 5. What's the best way to give them haste? I don't know. We're gonna have to wait until the entire set is spoiled, but there's a lot of potential for this card, especially with the sheer card advantage of being able to flash it back later. Next up, we've got Sokka's Haiku. This is another lesson. It's an instant for 2 blue and 3. You counter target spell, draw a card, mill 3 cards, and then untap 1 land. What a strange card. It just kind of does everything, but it's super expensive. It feels like a little baby Rewind. Rewind costs 4 mana and untaps all 4 of your lands. This costs 5 mana and only untaps 1. So it's going to feel like it costs 4 mana, which is kind of okay, except you can't necessarily play it on curve for 4 mana. But either way, it's pure card advantage. You counter a spell and you draw a card. So at the very least, it's 2 for 1 value, while also putting some stuff in your graveyard, which potentially ends up giving you value, especially since we've already seen that flashback shows up in this set. And untapping a land is cool. Maybe you can untap a land that you used for something else, like a man land, a creature, whatever. Maybe you can untap your Fountain Port and then use it again. You don't necessarily just have to untap a land that you used to play this and then use that land for mana. So the more of an ability we have to utilize that 1 land we get to untap, I think the better this card will get. But next up, we've got Southern Air Temple. This is the one shrine that we've seen so far. A legendary enchantment shrine for 1 white and 3. When it enters, you put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of shrines you control. So at the very least, all of your creatures get a +1/+1 counter when you play this for 4, which is not bad. And then also, whenever another shrine you control enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. That way, it doesn't matter if you play this early or late. If you play this late, you've already got a bunch of other shrines out, and you can get all of those counters. But you don't have to worry about playing this early. You play it early, every time you play a shrine, you're going to get those counters that you would have gotten if that shrine was already out and you played this later. So you don't really lose any value by playing it early, which I think is really, really important. The one thing I really want to point out about this card is the fact that it is an uncommon. The fact that we're getting shrines at the uncommon rarity is sort of exciting. It means they may go way deeper with shrines here than maybe we anticipate. So I'm really excited to see what they do with shrines. Like, are we going to get a cycle in uncommon and then maybe like a cycle of 2-color shrines at rare? Who knows? Maybe it could be way more than that. Maybe it could be way less than that, and I'm just like way off the mark. But I feel like if this is an uncommon and they want this to work in limited, which they do design every set around working, you know, efficiently in limited, they're going to have shrines be a real thing in limited in order for them to exist at the uncommon level. So I would assume there's going to be a good amount. Pretty interesting. Next up, we've got our batch of bonus sheet cards. These are rares and mythics that are going to be in the bonus sheet that are not legal in standard. You have a very rare chance of pulling one out of a normal booster pack, and if you do during a sealed or draft, you can play these in sealed or draft. They are also legal in every other format other than standard, so you can play them in Commander, you can play them in like Pioneer and Modern and stuff like that. You just can't play them in standard, and that's why they're a bonus sheet. Kind of weird. It kind of feels like with this Universes Beyond set, they're trying to have both sides of the coin, have a standard legal Universes Beyond set just like Final Fantasy, but at the same time also have like this subset of not standard legal Universes Beyond cards that are maybe on par power level with like Lord of the Rings back when that came out, when that one wasn't standard legal because all of the cards were way more powerful. So kind of interesting. I'm also pretty sure that these bonus sheet cards are going to be included in the Jumpstart packs. So I think you'll be able to use them in Jumpstart as well. They have this different set symbol here that looks like the kite glider. This one in particular is the Cabbage Merchant, a 2/2 legendary human citizen for 1 green and 2. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, you make a food. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, you sack a food, and you can tap 2 untapped foods you control to add 1 mana of any color. Honestly, pretty good in Commander, right? You're going to make a whole bunch of foods when all of your opponents are casting a bunch of non-creature spells, and then you're going to be able to use those foods to just ramp mana like crazy. The downside being, if somebody smashes you in the face, you have to sacrifice some of those foods, so you want to try to like make sure you're not going to get attacked, which is kind of tricky in Commander. But this card definitely looks like it's mostly meant for Commander. Still, if you end up pulling it in Limited, it should be pretty fun there. Next up, we've got Fire Lord Ozai, which is also a bonus sheet card. This is a 4/4 legendary human noble for 1 black and 3. Whenever he attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, you add an amount of red mana equal to the sacrificed creature's power. And until end of combat, you don't lose this mana as steps end. So it's kind of firebending, but you have to sacrifice a creature in order to firebend X, where X is the creature's power. I'm kind of confused why they didn't just word it like that and make it actual firebending, because thematically, flavorfully, that's what it's doing here. It's allowing you to sack a creature to firebend, right? But I'm sure they have their reasons for not actually calling it that. It also have a 6 colorless mana activated ability where you exile the top card of each opponent's library, and until end of turn you may play one of those cards without paying its mana cost. So another card that gets way better if you're playing multiplayer Commander, where you're going to get more value off of potential targets to play for free off of your opponent's decks. But either way, being able to generate a bunch of mana and then use that to whatever you want, as long as it's instant speed effects or instants from your hand or whatnot, is pretty interesting. And having the mana dump here for 6 mana to make sure that you always have at least something you can try to build mana towards using makes the card that much better, I think. Next up, we've got, I believe, the last of the bonus sheet cards. This is Aang Airbending Master, a 4/4 legendary human avatar ally for 1 white and 4. When he enters, you airbend another target creature, and we now know what airbending is. You exile that card, and when it's exiled, its owner may cast it for 2 rather than its mana cost. It reminds me of Aven Interrupter, which would plot a card that you counter, and then the plotted card would cost an extra 2 because Aven Interrupter makes things that are played from exile cost an extra 2. It kind of feels like that. If you get rid of something really expensive, they get to play it back for super cheap. You could get rid of something that is like a 1-drop and it actually costs them more. It's also worth pointing out, if you have Aven Interrupter on the battlefield when you play this, it's going to cost them extra mana to replay it because they're playing it from exile, and that's one of Aven Interrupter's abilities, which is pretty cool. He also has an ability whenever 1 or more creatures you control leave the battlefield without dying, you get an experience counter. So if you decide to airbend your own creature so that you can replay it, you'll actually get an experience counter. But even if you don't, like, it can still be versatile, like, tempo removal that then sets up this ability to later on get experience counters when things that you control leave the battlefield without dying. And that's going to work, like, if you flicker them, or if you, use Nurturing Pixie to return them to your hand or whatever. But it's also going to work if your opponent uses any kind of like exile removal or bounce removal. It makes that stuff really bad for your opponent. If your opponent plays a Banishing Light and exiles your creature, that counts as a creature you control leaving the battlefield without dying. So you end up getting an experience counter for that. So it's got a little built-in resilience or resistance to exile removal, which I think is really cool. And then also at the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 1/1 white ally creature token for each experience counter you have. So this is working off multiple synergies here. We see another card that works with ally creature type, which is going to be interesting to see how deep that goes. But you also have a card that can get you experience counters and can use those experience counters. And if we start to see multiple cards like that, those kind of snowball with each other, where the more things you have that give experience counters, the better your cards that use those experience counters get, and they all just kind of like help each other get even better. So really interesting to see how deep that goes and see if it's a mechanic that's limited to just the bonus sheet, just the jumpstart stuff, or if some of that experience counter stuff actually ends up being inside the base set and standard legal. Super curious about that. I guess we're gonna have to wait to find out. But next up, this is actually the last of the bonus sheet cards. This is Katara Waterbending Master, a 1/3 legendary human warrior ally for 1 blue and 1. Whenever you cast a spell during an opponent's turn, you get an experience counter, so another way to build up a bunch of experience counters. And whenever Katara attacks, you may draw a card for each experience counter you have if you do discard a card. So you have to get to just 1 experience counter in order to be able to loot on attacks. But then as you cast more and more spells, that loot turns into a very powerful draw effect. You still have to discard 1, but you only ever have to discard 1 every time you use this ability. If you get to the point where you have 4 experience counters, you're drawing 4, discarding 1. That ends up being super powerful. And if you have this card alongside the Aang card that we just saw, you have multiple ways to build up experience counters and multiple payoffs for those experience counters. And that's where things get really crazy. That's what I was talking about before. So I'm just super curious to see how deep this ends up going. But next up, we are back to the standard base set for the rares and the mythics. This one is Aang's Iceberg, an enchantment with flash for 1 white and 2. Whenever this enchantment enters, you exile up to 1 other target non-land permanent until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. So it's literally just Banishing Light with flash, right? Absolutely nuts. Not quite as good as like Leyline Binding, because that could be played for as low as 1 mana in the decks that want to run it, that are going domain. But getting access to a flash Banishing Light that's always going to be 3 mana, you don't have to worry about jumping through the hoops of getting domain, is still really, really good. And then on top of that, it has another ability. Like, power creep's a hell of a drug. Waterbend 3, sacrifice this enchantment if you do Scry 2. And the way waterbending works is it's not actually an ability itself. It is a way to cost reduce an activated ability. It essentially adds Convoke to an activated ability on your permanent. So the waterbending 3 here means you pay 3 mana, but for each of those 1 colorless mana, you can tap a creature instead to pay for 1. So you could literally just tap 3 creatures and pay no mana and sack this to scry 2, which is kind of interesting. It's also a nice little way to tap creatures that want to be tapped, and we've seen a bunch of that with like the survival mechanic in Duskmourn, and there were a couple cards that came in Edge of Eternities that care about being tapped as well to go with, you know, the station cards and stuff like that. So having another way to like incidentally tap some stuff down and get extra value out of them, I think might be where the most value lies in this ability, at least on this card, because scrying 2 is just scrying 2. But if you get to tap down your dudes and trigger their abilities and scry 2 for no mana, that could be pretty good. You also sacrifice the enchantment when you do it. So say they're going to like destroy all enchantments or destroy this enchantment, you could sack it in response. If they had some kind of a sweeper that kills all creatures and enchantments, you could sack this in response so that the creature they get back dies, like stuff like that. There's a little bit of nuance there, which I think is pretty cool. But at the end of the day, just having a flash enchantment for 3 mana that exiles anything is super good, and anything else on top of that is just gravy. Next up, we've got You the Moon Spirit. This is a 3/3 legendary creature spirit ally with flying and vigilance for 1 blue and 3. Not the greatest body in the world. It's a little bit slow when compared to the insane power creep of standard these days, but it has this Waterbend 5 ability, where you tap it and you can cast a non-creature spell from your hand without paying its mana cost. This is nuts. You can literally just tap a creature and 5 other creatures to pay no mana and literally cast any non-creature spell for free. And it still counts as casting it, which means it's going to trigger any on-cast sort of triggers that normally wouldn't trigger if you just like put something into play or whatever the case may be. I think where this card gets really nasty is with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Those of you who have been watching the channel for a while know how much I love that card, and I love brewing with it. And if you could just get this into your graveyard and then exile it, and all of your creatures with counters on them get this ability where they could potentially for free just cast non-creature spells from your hand if you have enough creatures to tap, that could just get really, really nutty. Even just as a backup way to, you know, if they kill your U before you get to use it, well, now you exile it with Agatha's Soul Cauldron and you get another shot at using the ability with another creature. Even that's really good. So without Agatha's Soul Cauldron, I think this is super slow and just dies to removal before you get to do anything relevant. But with Agatha's Soul Cauldron around, I actually think this card could be really, really nuts. It could be a must-answer card as soon as you drop it. And even if they do, you could still get access to using it. Another good thing to point out is the fact that if you are able to give this thing haste, you could literally use the ability the turn that you play it, even with no mana. Even if you only have 4 lands and you use all 4 of them to play your U, if it somehow had haste, you could potentially tap like 5 token creatures to pay the waterbending costs and tap this and still get something out, even in response to like a removal spell, which could be pretty cool. So I think there are some really interesting ways to use a card like this. I'm excited to see where the rest of the set goes and see just how realistic using a card like this might be. But next up, we've got Redirect Lightning. I think this card is busted. This is an instant lesson for just 1 red mana. It changes the target of target spell or ability with a single target, but as an additional cost to cast this spell, you have to pay 5 life or 2 mana. So it's a 3-drop. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like Force of Will. Even though you don't get to play it for free, it's like a kind of more expensive card that will cost you 3 mana, but under the right situations, you can play it for almost free for just 1 mana if you have the 5 life to pay. And that's hugely important, because if you're all tapped out except for 1, and they play a crazy spell that like mills you for half your deck, or kills your big threat that you need to keep around, you can just jam this for 1 mana, pay the 5 life, and, you know, retarget it, make them mill half their deck, or kill their best creature with their own removal spell, and end up 2-for-1ing them. A card like this is actually incredibly valuable because of its ability to 2-for-1. You get rid of their removal spell, and you get rid of their biggest threat by redirecting their removal spell back at their biggest threat. So this card has the potential to be nuts. The fact that it can maybe be played for 1 mana, but you can also just pay the extra if you don't want to lose the life, that versatility is nuts. And my biggest worry here is going back to the learn lesson mechanic. If they do end up introducing learn spells to standard in another Strixhaven set down the line, this could be absolutely busted as a sideboard card. Like, being able to fetch this as your lesson is nuts, and this is probably the best lesson we've seen that might be viable in older formats that have access to the learn spells. Very scary card, very good card, and I think it's going to absolutely see play. Next up, we've got Momo, Friendly Flyer. And this one I'm super excited about. I'll explain why after I let you know what it does. This is a 1/1 legendary lemur bat ally with flying for just 1 white mana. The first non-lemur creature spell with flying you cast during each of your turns costs 1 less to cast, and whenever another creature you control with flying enters, Momo gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So this guy wants to be used in a deck that cares about flying, that has all flying creatures, but it also wants to be used with a deck that has flying creatures that have at least 1 generic mana cost, colorless mana cost in their cost, so that they can get the cost reduction, and they want to play with flyers that aren't lemurs. And when you put all of that together, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the deck I just brewed and put up on the channel the other day, Anunnaki, which is the new Angel Tribal that also cares about 1-drops because it uses the new Angel that can fetch a 1-drop while also pushing Angel Tribal with like Giada and the new Inquisitor and stuff like that. Angel Tribal is on the cusp of being amazing, and if this is like one of your only non-angel cards in that deck and you can jam it on 1 and make all of your angels cost 1 less to cast and put a counter on this whenever an angel enters, this could be the perfect 1-drop to complement the new Lightstall Inquisitor 1-drop that is an angel for angel decks. That could be like your 8 1-drops, and then you could just go completely ham with angels. You can use the angel that finds any 1-drops, which could find Momo or a Lightstall Inquisitor. If you haven't seen that deck yet, I highly recommend you checking it out because I thought it was a meme when I first started theory crafting it, and it ended up being absolutely insane. It's called Anunnaki. It is Esper. It is up on the channel right now. We use Mockingbird to clone things, and we can fetch Mockingbird with the angel that fetches a 1-drop. There's just so much synergy in that deck, and it's nuts. And I didn't mean to go down a rabbit hole, or I guess a lemur hole, but I really think when this card is released to standard, that deck's going to get so good using this as one of the other 1-drops, because the biggest thing angels have lacked, at least whenever they've been almost relevant in standard, is just good 1-drop angels to be, you know, really aggressive right out of the gate. And this kind of solves that problem, even though it's not an angel. You need to play it in a deck that's all other creature types, and what better one than angels when all of them fly? Well, I guess with the exception of the Lightstall Inquisitor. They I digress. I think this card is awesome. There are probably some other decks that will work well with it. Obviously, a Bat Tribal deck's going to work well with Momo because they are not lemurs. They will get the cost reduction. They will put counters on Momo. And you have another Bat here that can trigger things like Zoraline gains you a life whenever a Bat attacks. So you get a little bit of extra synergy there. So Bat decks can absolutely be nuts with Momo, but I think Angel decks are going to be where it's at. That's just my opinion. Next up, we've got Soka, Bold Boomeranger, a 1/1 legendary human warrior ally for 2 mana in the colors of Izzet. When Soka enters, you discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many cards. We've been seeing this ability on a lot of cards lately. I feel like there's at least 1 card in every set that has this ability or similar. But then also, whenever you cast an artifact or lesson spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Soka. So this is one of those cards that cares about lessons, which is interesting. I'm assuming there's going to be a lot more payoffs than just this. But lessons and artifacts, they both pay off Soka, which is actually really interesting. Do you build some kind of like a lesson artifact hybrid deck with this? I don't know. We're going to have to see. Or maybe it's just made to be super versatile so you can use it in a lesson deck or in an artifact deck and not have to necessarily mix and match them. I could see it going a lot of different ways, but I do want to point out this is the first 2-drop that we've gotten that has this ability to like discard to draw 2. Most of them have been 3-drops, stuff like Kiora and Tersa and stuff like that. So having a 2-drop that can do that could be really good in decks that want that, maybe like a Jeskai Oculus deck or something like that. There's just a lot you could potentially do with a card like this. Next up, we've got Katara, Water Tribe's Hope, a 3/3 legendary human warrior ally with Vigilance for 5 mana, 2 blue, 1 white, and 2. That's a lot. 3/3 Vigilance for 5. She better have some good abilities. Whenever Katara enters, you create a 1/1 white ally creature token, but only when she enters, not when she attacks. Okay. But she has a Waterbend ability. Waterbend X. Creatures you control have base power and toughness XX until end of turn. X can't be 0. Activate only during your turn. What an interesting card. You could slam this as a win con, right? You slam it, you could immediately tap Katara and the 1/1 you make to at least Waterbend 2 and turn everything into a 2/2. But why stop there? If you're in a deck that's go wide and you have a ton of creatures, just tap them all, turn all of your creatures into like 10/10s, 12/12s, whatever, and then maybe you like fling one at your opponent, or maybe there's some other value that you can get out of making them huge that doesn't necessarily involve attacking. I think that's where things get the most interesting, because if you can commit all of your creatures into waterbending for the biggest amount possible by tapping them all down, you could potentially get a bigger payoff. You just won't be able to attack because they'll be tapped down. So I'm excited to try and dig in and find other ways to use this that don't necessarily involve the combat step, that let you get a whole bunch of value off having huge creatures on the battlefield. And if you guys can think of any way to do that, let me know in the comments. I think this is going to be a really interesting brew around for sure. But next up, we've got Fire Lord Zuko, our first 3-color gold multicolor. I always used to call them gold back in the day. Did you guys ever call them gold cards back in the day? Let me know in the comments. I'm old. This is a 2/4 legendary human noble ally for 3 mana in the colors of Mardu. Has Firebending X, where X is Fire Lord Zuko's power. So as this thing gets stronger, it generates more and more mana. It's starting to give me Vivi vibes, which has me a little bit worried. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, and whenever a permanent you control enters from exile, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So it also kind of feels like Rocco Street Chef a little bit, giving you counters whenever you cast a spell from exile, or whenever a permanent you control enters. I guess the one thing to point out, though, is you have to control the spell and the permanent. So you're not going to get value off your opponent playing things from exile, which is kind of a bummer. But still, having a dude that makes you want to build around exile again. The 𝑇𝑒𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛𝑐𝑒 deck was super fun back before that rotated out of standard. And having maybe something similar to that available in standard again, with something like this and maybe some other cards that, you know, emphasize the playing from exile, could end up being really good. It'll work really well with the warp cards that were just introduced in Edge of Eternities. Just a lot of really interesting possibilities for a card like this, especially with the fact that it could potentially make a whole bunch of mana out of nowhere and just snowball, very much like Vivi. I do think it's not quite as busted as Vivi, because there are more hoops you have to jump through. You have to get its power up, but you also have to attack to generate the mana, and you can only use that mana during the combat step for instant speed stuff. So I don't think he's really busted like Vivi is, but definitely good enough to try brewing around. If you have ideas, let me know. But next up, we've got Katara the Fearless, another 3-color multicolor card. This is a 3/3 legendary human warrior ally for 3 mana in the colors of Bant. If a triggered ability of an ally you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So now we start to see just how deep the ally synergies are going to start to go. Being able to get double triggers on all allies. It doesn't care how big or small they are or what color they are. You just double all the triggers of your allies. Seems kind of interesting. That being said, I am getting a little bit exhausted with every set having some card that doubles some kind of triggered ability in some way. I feel like they're getting a little bit... They're losing their imagination a little bit, you know? They're getting a little bit paint by numbers with the sets. It's like there's always just a new version of all of these different kinds of cards in every set, a new way of doing it, but it's kind of the same thing. There's so many cards in standard right now that double triggered abilities, and this is going to be another one. This is going to be another option. That being said, doubling triggered abilities is very, very powerful, and you might be able to build some really ridiculous decks around a card like this, so I'm still excited to try and, you know, give it a try. Try it out. Next up, we got Toph the First Metalbender, a 3/3 legendary human warrior ally for 4 mana in the colors of Naya. This one is the one that I think is the craziest right now. Non-token artifacts you control are lands in addition to their other types. And at the beginning of your end step, you Earthbend 2. So target land you control becomes a 0/0, and you put 2+1/+1 counters on it. It gains haste. But when it dies or is exiled, you return it to the battlefield tapped. This is going to do so many things. First of all, as soon as Toph is on the battlefield, all of your non-token artifacts in your hand are going to be able to trigger landfall abilities. That is terrifying in my opinion. Just play out a bunch of artifacts, trigger a bunch of landfall abilities, especially if they're like 0 or 1 cost artifacts, could be kind of nuts. It's also worth noting that because all of your artifacts are lands and you can earthbend those artifacts, you could theoretically turn an artifact into a creature with Earthbend 2 just to sacrifice it so that it comes back tapped, and when it does come back tapped, maybe it re-triggers and enters the battlefield ability, like a chainsaw as an example. Say you got a chainsaw and you got Toph out. You turn the chainsaw into a land, not only can you maybe swing in for 2 and get in for damage, you could sack it after combat and it comes back as the normal chainsaw and maybe kills a creature on your opponent's side. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can really brew around a card like this. I think this is probably the most exciting card I've seen just from like a brewer's point of view, because there's just so much potential here, both with lands, with landfall, with artifact decks, with enters the battlefield abilities. You could use artifacts that have like indestructible, like the nutrient block, turn that into a 2/2 that can't die with this. There's a lot of interesting implications. There's even cards that care about how wide you are with lands that turn on abilities, and you're going to have a whole bunch of lands all of a sudden. If you slam Toph, you might have double the amount of lands, technically, the amount of lands on the battlefield as you had before Toph, because all the artifacts you have out already just all of a sudden become lands. You can't tap them for mana, but I mean, there's just so many ways. There's so many ways to try and break this sort of ability. And that's what's exciting. I think there's a bunch of different ways this can be good, not just one particular deck, one particular, strategy or archetype. I think there are a bunch of different ways this could end up being really, really awesome. So I'm super excited to brew with Toph. If you have ideas about how to use it, the kind of deck you'd want to build around, or just a card you'd like to combo it with, let me know in the comments, because I'm pretty excited to see what we can dig into when early access comes around. But next up, we've got our mythics. Now, before I get into the new mythics, I do just want to recap the one mythic card that they had already spoiled last month when they announced the set. Just to make sure anyone that hasn't seen that video where I covered the announcement, that hasn't seen this card, just make sure you've seen every card that's been announced so far. So we're only briefly going to go over this. We're going to get to the new mythics. This is Avatar Aang, a 4/4 legendary creature human avatar ally with flying and firebending 2 for 4 mana. One of each color except black. Now, we finally know what Firebending 2 does. We didn't know at the time that we saw this card when it was first spoiled. It means that when you attack, you get 2 red mana, right? So, 4/4 flyer for 4, when it attacks, you get 2 red mana. And also, whenever you Waterbend, Earthbend, Firebend, or Airbend, you draw a card. And if you've done all 4 this turn, transform. So you swing with a 4/4 flyer, you make 2 red mana, you draw a card. That's on its own pretty good for 4 mana. If you can figure out a way to Waterbend, Earthbend, and Airbend in the same turn, you get to flip this thing, and that becomes pretty crazy. But not only do you get to flip this thing, you get to draw a card for each one. So if you're able to do all 4 of these, you'll end up drawing 4 cards and flipping Aang, which is kind of crazy. And I want to point out that this is a little bit easier to do than I initially thought it would be, because now that we know what Waterbend does, we know there's the potential for a Waterbending ability to just be free by tapping lands, tapping creatures to pay for the mana ability. So really, you get your Firebending and your Waterbending potentially for free. You just got to figure out a way to Earthbend and Airbend in the same turn. And then you've got those 4 cards, and you end up flipping Aang into Aang, Master of Elements, a 6/6 flying legendary avatar ally. Spells you cast cost a WUBRG less to cast, and it can reduce generic costs, which is crazy. All of your spells are costing 5 less and potentially not costing mana of specific colors. That's just nuts. At the beginning of each upkeep, you may transform Aang, Master of Elements. If you do, you gain 4 life, draw 4 cards, put 4 counters on him, and he deals 4 damage to each opponent. You can literally just trigger that whenever you want. You don't have to. You can keep him out so that you can play whatever you want for like insanely cheap. But if you decide, you know what, I need cards, I'm out of cards, let it flip back at the beginning of whoever's upkeep you want. You gain the 4 life, you draw the 4 cards, you make them even bigger, you deal 4 damage to your opponents, and then you go back to Avatar Aang and you start the process all over again, except he's an 8/8 this time. An 8/8 flyer that still has firebending. Just absolutely nuts. It's going to be really fun to see if this card is actually good enough in Standard. It's definitely powerful enough. It's giving me Omnath vibes for sure. But is the right deck going to exist that you can build around this? Are we going to get efficient ways to, you know, Earthbend and Airbend and that sort of thing to really make this matter consistently? We'll have to wait until we see the entire set to find out. But now that we know what all of the bending abilities do, this looks even more interesting, especially because waterbending can potentially be free. Next up, we've got Fated Firepower, an enchantment with flash for 3 red and X. It enters with X fire counters on it. If a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus an amount of damage equal to the number of fire counters on this enchantment instead. Every single thing that deals damage to your opponent or a permanent they control is gonna deal X more damage. That's just nuts. My first thought is a burn deck. Granted, this might be too expensive for an actual burn deck, right? But if you played this for 5, all of your burn spells do an extra 2 damage. That's kind of cool. This might also just be better as a top end for like a very aggressive deck, right? You just play everything out, and when this is the last card in your hand, whatever mana you have, you just jam it. Maybe it's 4 and everything just does 1 extra damage. Maybe it's 5 and everything does 2. Maybe the game got dragged out and it's 7 and everything does an extra 4. Either way, being able to jam this and just swing all seems pretty cool. I think part of what makes it so awesome is the fact that it has flash, which means in the right deck, you could just flash it out on your opponent's turn if you don't have to play any interaction. More importantly, you can flash it out in the middle of combat, so you could attack, wait for them to declare blockers, and then come out of nowhere with a big Fated Firepower so that all their blockers they thought were going to survive end up dying, and all the stuff that they didn't block, actually, they take way more damage. Really messing with their math. There's a lot this can do. I'm a little bit skeptical because it's kind of expensive, and Red really doesn't want expensive cards, and I'm curious to see if there ends up being kind of like an efficient, consistent way to play this. A little bit cheaper, get it out a little earlier, and get around that expensive cost. Maybe with the blue dude from Edge of Eternities that makes your second spell cost 2 less, you could potentially play like a 1-drop. You could play like a shock to your opponent and respond to the shock by playing this X equals 2, but only actually paying 4 mana total. So you paid 5 mana, and then your shock does 4, and then everything does an extra 2 for the rest of the game. There are some interesting things you can do, but again, it does feel really expensive with me. I think we're gonna need certain cards that interact with this and let it come out cheaper, or you know, give you a bunch of mana. I guess the one thing I'm overlooking, actually, you know what? I'm gonna backpedal here because this works insanely well with firebending, specifically because it has flash, right? That's what this is meant to do. If you swing with firebenders and make a bunch of red mana in the middle of combat, all of a sudden you can just flash in Fated Firepower with that mana and wreak complete havoc over your opponent. That is how this is supposed to be played, and this card's going to be nuts. I guess this card, how good it is completely dependent on how good firebending ends up being, how efficient it ends up being, and there might be other ways to get value out of this card, but that's definitely where you're going to get the most value. Yeah, now I'm really excited to try and brew around it. Firebending.deck with Fated Firepower is absolutely the way to go with this card, and I really want to know if there are really competitive, like really efficient firebending cards. So here's hoping. I think that could be really interesting, and I'm excited to find out. But next up, we've got Appa Steadfast Guardian. This is a 3/4 legendary Bison ally for 2 white and 2. He has flash and flying, and when Appa enters, airbend any number of other target non-land permanents that you control. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, create a 1/1 white ally creature token. You know, now that I'm thinking about it, this would work really good in like a Boros firebending deck, because you swing, you make a bunch of extra mana that you can only use things at instant speed to play, And then whatever your opponent blocks, now you flash in your Appa, you use 2 of your firebending mana, you only have to actually pay 2 white to cast it. And whatever they blocked that's going to die, you can just return, right? You can just exile and get to replay them later, probably for cheaper, for only 2. And set yourself up to also make a bunch of 1/1 white allies in the process. I think that's an interesting way to use this card. You could also just use it in like a control-oriented style deck where you're flashing it in on your opponent's turn to like save your stuff or whatever the case may be. This could be an interesting like Pixie deck card, maybe. It's a little bit expensive, but again, if the firebending stuff ends up being good enough and there ends up being some kind of weird hybrid between like a firebending deck and like a nurturing Pixie deck, like maybe this card ends up being perfect in that deck. You can pick up stuff you want to pick up for way cheaper using firebending mana. I don't know. It's too soon to know for sure because we have to see how deep each of the card pools go for those mechanics. But there's at least potential. I think no matter what, this guy's just super fun. Flash flying 3/4 that saves your stuff and then gives you a bunch of board presence later on when you replay that stuff. Kind of seems awesome. Even just to protect from a Wrath, I think it's really good. So again, another card that I'm super excited to explore. The next card here is the Rise of Sozin. I think this might be the last card of today. This is a saga for 2 black and 4. On chapter 1, you destroy all creatures. So it's an enchantment that is a board wipe, which is super, super relevant because you can do things like get it back with a Yuna. Since it is an enchantment, I'm pretty excited. It is a bit expensive, but I think there will be ways to get around that. If I was a betting man, I think there's ways to get this out more efficiently, more consistently, other than it just feeling like, oof, 6-drop. Chapter 2, choose a card name, search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name, and exile them, then that player shuffles. I want to point something out about this before we move on. Your opponent does not get to redraw cards for anything you hit out of their hand. And almost every card we've ever seen that has this ability, this Chapter 2 ability to exile things, it lets them do that. If it hits something from their hand, they get to redraw cards to replace whatever it hits in their hand. This Chapter 2 does not do that. You could just literally get rid of whatever you want. You could get rid of Omniscience, and they could have 2 Omniscience in their hand, and they're both gone. They don't redraw anything. That's exciting to me, just because we don't really see this ability happen in that way, at least not as far as I can remember in any recent times. But then on Chapter 3, you exile this saga, return it to the battlefield, transform under your control. Sorry, saga. Exile this saga. It becomes Fire Lord Sozin, a 5/5 legendary human noble with menace and fire breathing 3. Harder to block, gives you 3 mana when it swings. Whenever Fire Lord Sozin deals combat damage to a player, you can pay X, and when you do, put any number of target creature cards with total mana value X or less from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. This is stupid powerful, specifically because Chapter 1 just killed all of their creatures just a couple turns ago, right? So basically being able to get back potentially like their best creatures, all of the creature cards that you killed if you have enough mana, with this thing, just overwhelming value, right? Granted, you do need to have enough mana to play into it. You do get an extra 3 here, and let's just assume you had 6 to hardcast the saga to begin with. You could have up to 9 mana and end up playing 9 mana's worth of things from your opponent's graveyard and not losing any card advantage, just keeping all your cards in your hand and playing their stuff from the graveyard. That could be pretty nuts. And you can get multiple things too. So even if you're up against like a weenie deck, like an aggro deck or something, they don't have some big thing to pull out of their graveyard. You just pull like all their things out of the graveyard and take them all. And they go straight onto the battlefield under your control. I think that's pretty awesome. Obviously, it gets even better with other firebenders because you get to make even more mana that you can pump into X to take even more things that you've killed in prior turns. I think this card has a lot of potential. It is expensive at 6 mana. It is really expensive, but it kind of does everything. Board wipe, specific deck archetype hate by taking out problematic cards. You could hit a Simulacrum Synthesizer on Chapter 2. You could hit whatever problematic card you need to. You could hit VV, get rid of all their VVs. Just a lot of crazy stuff you can do with Chapter 2 when it's sort of kind of free value. And then eventually getting this creature that's just an absolute game ender could be nuts. I don't know the best way to use it yet. I think it probably will involve other firebenders to just get even more mana for that ability. But if you have ideas about how to use this thing, definitely let me know in the comments. And that is going to do it for today's video. That was everything that was spoiled in that first initial teaser where they dropped that first batch of spoilers. So there will be more spoilers on the way, and when they come, I'll make sure to cover that stuff and get that stuff out to you guys as soon as possible. We also got a bunch of Spider-Man spoilers recently, and I haven't put that video up on the channel yet, but I am going to record a video covering all of the Spider-Man spoilers that dropped not too long ago. Make sure I get that stuff out to you as well. So look forward to all of these videos. Deck techs are going to continue to drop. All the stuff is coming. There's so much stuff coming, so be ready for that. Please hit that like button. Please subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck techs, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.